Hi, everyone. I'm Joy Ruff, the ER Studio Product Marketing Manager at IDERA, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Bada Bing, Bada Boom, Better Business Architecture and Data Architecture with ER Studio 17. This presentation will share the highlights of the ER Studio 17 release, discuss the importance of business process modeling as the first step for data governance, and demonstrate how ER Studio Business Architect helps companies map and model the relationships between people, processes, and data. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Today, our presenters are Ron Huizenga and Kim Brushaber from IDERA. Ron is the Senior Product Manager for the ER Studio product family in Enterprise Architecture. Ron has over 30 years of experience as an IT executive and consultant in enterprise data architecture, governance, business process reengineering and improvement, program and project management, software development, and business management. Kim is the Senior Product Manager for ER Studio Business Architect. Kim has over 20 years of experience as a business analyst, software developer, product manager, and IT executive. Kim enjoys working as a translator between the business and the technical teams in an organization. And with that, over to you, Ron.
Thank you, Joy, and welcome everybody. We're very excited about the ER Studio 17 release, and particularly the impact that we're able to make on both business architecture and data architecture. So without further ado, I'll start going through, and we'll talk about some of the things that are coming. I'll start with a brief introduction and background, just a little bit on IDERA and the product suite in general. Then we'll switch gears and we'll talk about the importance of enterprise architecture and the components of enterprise architecture that are important to all businesses. We'll then briefly cover highlights of the ER Studio 17 features that are in this release, and then a deeper dive into the business architecture and modeling, including a couple of demos on the BPMN capabilities in particular, and then we'll follow that up with some questions and answers at the end. IDERA was founded in 2003 with headquarters in Houston, Texas. We're a market leader in creating database lifecycle management solutions. We have over 20,000 customers, and we're in more than 90% of the Fortune 100 and 97% of the Global 2000 companies. We have a large community. We have over 60,000 plus users of our free tools and over 20,000 community members, and growing faster and faster every week in terms of our online community presence. The ER Studio Suite has been part of IDERA since 2015, and ER Studio has actually been around since the mid-90s, so it's a very mature product, and we continue to lead innovation in adding these new features as we keep going forward. Just a very brief introduction in terms of the high-level components of ER Studio, and I won't focus too much on the interactions here, we'll do that later. When you think of ER Studio, people quite often think of ER Studio Data Architect because that's where the suite originated in terms of a very strong data modeling and data architecture foundation. And it grew out from there with the ability to check models in and out of a repository, ultimately adding in capabilities such as the Business Architect for the business process modeling over 10 years ago, the ER Studio Software Architect for application architecture primarily in UML modeling constructs, and then expanding our repository capabilities into a publishing portal, which is now known as Team Server, along with the repository itself. Let's talk about enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is extremely important to all organizations, whether you realize it or not. To be able to do any type of business transformation, you really need to have a solid foundation in enterprise architecture. Typically, when we look at enterprise architecture in organizations, the general school of thought is 4 different architectural domains, whether you're looking at things from some of the architectural frameworks like TOGAF that talks about the 4 architecture domains, or something like the Zachman frameworks that talk about it in a slightly different light, but still comes back to those 4 foundational pieces. We have a slightly different spin on it as well, where we have the 4 aspects of enterprise architecture being data architecture, business architecture, application architecture, and technical architecture. Where we differ is we view the data architecture as the necessary foundation for all of the rest of the architectures combined for a couple of different reasons. One, all of enterprise architecture and architecture in general began with data architecture in the early days. That's what we focused on, was defining data models, building out our data architectures, because we really wanted to track the information that's important in the business. We need that solid foundation to track the information because anything that we do is recorded in the form of data or information in our businesses. We also require that very solid data architecture foundation for all of the other aspects of enterprise architecture, because we need to properly manage all the metadata associated with all the other aspects of the enterprise architecture as well. When you have all of these working in concert, that's what really helps you to drive out enterprise enablement and really gets you going on enterprise architecture in general. And having all of that in place is really the foundation for data governance, process governance, and all the other strategic activities in your business. Let's just fall back on a few definitions of these 4 different domains, and I won't go with this in great detail, but in general, enterprise architecture is really a defined practice to conduct enterprise analysis, and it's based in your design, planning, and implementations. And you need to be strategic and tie this into business objectives and outcomes to be very successful at it. It applies a number of defined principles and practices, and we need to go through all those different aspects that we talked about, or those domains comprising the enterprise architecture, and we have to have a balanced approach when we're doing that. Data architecture, of course, is really talking about the models, policies, rules, and standards that govern the data that's collected, how it's stored, arranged, integrated, and put to use in the systems and in the organization itself. However, that by itself is not sufficient. We really need to be able to provide context for that as well. And that's where business architecture comes into play. When we look at business architecture, and this is actually a definition from the business architecture body of knowledge, and it's defined as a blueprint of the enterprise that provides a common understanding of the organization, and it's used to align strategic objectives and tactical demands. What's extremely important about that is we also need to understand the information that's utilized in the organization, the processes that act upon that data in organization, and as well, we need to be able to expand that further with application architecture. And that's where we're describing the behavior of the applications in the business. And we're not really focused so much on the structure of applications itself, but the primary focus on application architecture is, again, focused down on the data and how it's consumed and produced by the applications in the organization, rather than the internal structure of the applications themselves. And we map the applications to business functions. So it's extremely important that we can tie that together by saying these are the business processes that act on data's journey throughout the organization. These are the applications that implement those particular processes, and that gives us the full organizational context. We then tie that into strategic goals and outcomes. And of course, last but not least, is we need a foundation to implement all of these things, so the technical architecture really starts to get into the hardware and architectural layer itself of all the components that allow us to tie these other things together. All of our systems, interfaces, parameters, and protocols that we use to really enable, from a technical standpoint, all the other aspects of the enterprise architecture. Let's talk about ER Studio 17 and the significance of that. When we work on our products, we actually categorize the features or the capabilities that we're implementing into different categories. So we have a number, but the ones I'm going to talk about today briefly are things that we're doing in business and enterprise architecture, data modeling and lineage, because of course that's extremely important as a facet of data architecture, data platform supports, because of course our customers need to be able to utilize all the different data platforms out there, collaboration and governance in terms of being able to share the information and collaborate and deliver solutions and communicate within your organizations. And then we find user experience is extremely important. So we split out user experience as a category on its own as we're continually to work to make our products better and make your experience in those products better through improving UIs, information, and that type of thing. In terms of business and enterprise architecture, the marquee feature for this release is the fact that we've enhanced our business process modeling to include the full BPMN 2 process modeling specification, which means we've added a number of new constructs for the different types of diagrams of choreography, collaboration, and conversation. We'll be digging into this a little bit deeper through a good part of the webcast itself. In terms of data modeling and lineage, we've made a few improvements there as well. In ER Studio, we promote conceptual modeling, logical modeling, and physical modeling. The first item, the improved non-specific relationship resolution, is because in logical models, you can have non-specific relationships before you resolve them in your physical model. So that could be representing a many-to-many or maybe an indeterminate relationship because you haven't quite got all the requirements yet to determine how you're going to decompose that in your physical models. We've made some improvements there for when we're actually generating physical models from our logical models in the resolution of those non-specific relationship types into the physical models themselves. Data lineage quality improvements. Again, data lineage is extremely important and it's a big part of data architecture. It's not just for mapping out ETL transformations from sources to targets and staging areas, but you can actually model in our tool complete data flows in Data Architect as well. So we've made some quality improvements there. In terms of data platform support, and again, we call it data platforms rather than database because we support NoSQL platforms as well. In this particular release, we've made some enhancements to resolution of the data types when we're reverse engineering from Hadoop Hive. We found that there were some inconsistencies in certain environments, so we've made improvements to those. And in particular, I'll dedicate a slide coming up to the new Meadow Wizard import bridges. We have very rich forward and reverse engineering capability in ER Studio with a lot of native drivers, but we also enhanced that in the Enterprise Team Edition with the Meadow Wizard that gives us a lot of import and export bridges to other platforms, modeling tools, and other environments. Again, from the collaboration and governance standpoint, all of the work that we've done to enhance our business process modeling also needs to be published and consumable by the users in your organization through the web interfaces and team server. So again, all the new constructs are publishable in team server, and that includes the diagrams and the underlying metadata so that people can browse and leverage them. And we made a number of enhancements to the change management in our tool as well. We have very rich change management capabilities, and we extended that out to team server quite a bit in our last release, and we've made some enhancements to further clarify some of the things that are going on there. And then in terms of user experience, again, in the Business Architect tool, what you're going to see is a lot of improved iconography and task markers to really let you know which types of tasks and processes you're working with visually in the tool itself. We've also got under the covers a number of team server performance improvements that we've bundled in this release, and also a number of improvements to the team server publishing of the data models and the Business Architect workspaces as well. Let's talk about the Meadow Wizard for a moment. The Meadow Wizard is a very capable set of capabilities. All in all, we have a number of bridges in Enterprise Team Edition. In fact, when we look at the total of the bridges, we actually have 98 different import bridges, 55 different export bridges, and 42 data lineage bridges. What you see on this slide are the changes for ER Studio 17. So we've actually introduced a number of new platform bridges for a number of the NoSQL data stores, such as Amazon S3, Avro, CouchDB. We also have import capabilities that even overlap some of other ones because we do support things like Hadoop Hive natively, but you can also get at it using the Meadow Wizard bridges as well. Cloudera, Hortonworks, MarkLogic, so a number of things there. And you'll notice that in addition to our native MongoDB support, you're seeing in these Meadow Wizard bridges a lot more support now for JSON as well, because JSON and document stores are becoming more prevalent in the marketplace. There are also a number of improvements to relational bridges. While we have native capabilities for these as well, you also have an alternative to bring some of this information in through the Meadow Wizard bridges for Azure, SQL Server, Oracle, and Teradata. So again, an alternate form to get to some of these database platforms if you wish to bring them into your logical and physical models. And then on the data lineage sides, which is typically where we have the ETL imports, we've now added Alteryx and ClickSense into the list of data lineage bridges that will map straight into the data lineage diagrams in ER Studio Data Architect. There are also a number of other improvements throughout the Meadow Wizard bridges in the suite, so there have been a number of performance improvements and quality improvements throughout many of the model bridges. And in particular, one of the things that we've done as well is a number of the model interchange bridges from other model platforms use XMI. So we've seen enhancements to the UML XMI2, and XMI1 is falling out of favor and not used in many tools anymore. So the XMI 1.x has actually been dropped out because everything is now supported by UML XMI2. Let's talk about the benefits of business process modeling. What we really need business process models for is to really help us to show how we can achieve and align ourselves to the organizational goals. We need the business process models as a blueprint to be able to do that. if you've been involved in any large business transformation initiative and that type of thing, you know that it's extremely important to be able to get a full understanding of the business processes, map them out, and understand how can it improve them. And you need visual maps and models to be able to do that. And you need to be able to tie those in to the data models and the data that you're working with throughout those business processes in your organization. Business processes are a very effective tool for communication. They help us to communicate within our organization, across organizational departments, and that allows us to break down the silos that may exist in our organization and really bridge those communication gaps. It helps us to effectively manage and streamline operations, and it also helps us to align the data usage in the organizations to the goals of the organization. In terms of a continuous improvement mentality, businesses really need to be able to review and evaluate their processes regularly because your business is constantly evolving. So what you need to be able to do is look at the gaps or areas that you can optimize those processes. And once you've identified those, you can then combine, streamline processes. You may need to modify processes for many different things. There may be new regulations that come into play. You may acquire other organizations through mergers and acquisitions. And all of those need to be utilized and brought together so that you can optimize your organization's operations effectively. And of course, very importantly, back onto the communication theme, is the process models themselves are a communication language for your organization. With those process models, everyone can share a common understanding of the key concepts, the key business processes in your organization, what people's roles are in those processes, and how everything ties together in the organization itself. And of course, a robust holistic business architecture, again, is one of the pillars and foundations to drive out a full enterprise architecture. And you need that to be able to support not only data governance, but also process governance in your organization as well. Let's now look at how companies typically utilize processes. We often talk about things like organizational maturity, and we talk about it a lot in terms of data maturity and the capability management scale and that type of thing. We have the same type of thing that happens when we look at process maturity in organizations. So what you'll find is an evolution of how business process modeling is typically used in organizations. Initially, people will usually use process models just to document and understand the existing business processes themselves. Once you've got that initial level of documentation, you can then start to do things like gap analysis. So then you actually start to move into the realm of business process management. You've documented your processes. You're now able to proactively manage those processes. And once you can do that, you set yourself up to go to the next stage of evolution, which is really where you can start to evaluate and drive business process improvements in your organizations. Then as your maturity increases even further, you'll find that you're falling back on the business process modeling to do process design right out of the gate. Because you've got those powerful constructs and you've got the backdrop of your organizational strategies and everything that you can tie it into as well. And as we move up to the end of fully mature organizations, that's when you really see organizations that are making full utilization of process modeling. A lot of this is done in terms of following quality initiatives or very rigorous sets of standards such as Lean, Six Sigma, and those types of things. Quite often it's done based on regulatory compliance, so we find that a lot of our pharmaceutical or healthcare customers are using things like Six Sigma, and they're using our business process modeling or business architect tool to do things like their supplier input, process, and output diagrams, in addition to the standard BPMN2 constructs in the organization. Let's talk about BPMN2 specifically. Business Architect has had BPMN 1.x for a number of years, but BPMN2 offers a number of advantages over and above what the original BPMN1 standard offered. Again, BPMN2 is a standardized approach which really drives process implementation for process design, and BPMN2 is a standard that was created by the Object Management Group. Of course, the Object Management Group has given us many useful standards in our industry throughout the years. The very important part is that it really has standardized modeling elements and symbols that are easy to understand and can be utilized across the business itself. And that means all stakeholders. Business analysts are the primary stakeholders that do a lot of the business process modeling. Developers and architects can easily understand what's going on. And it's a very effective communications medium to have discussions with business people to help them design and optimize their business processes as well. BPMN evolved from a number of different things. So when the standard was put together, it borrowed from a number of other standards or process activities that were in the industry already. So things like UML, which is another standard that was done by the Object Management Group, it borrowed heavily from UML. There were IDEF was out there in the industry, so it borrowed concepts from IDEF, activity decision flows, EPC diagrams, and business process specifications. To mention just a few, there are a number of other things that went into the standard as well. In ER Studio Business Architect, we have a number of extensions beyond BPMN2, and we actually had started with a lot of these constructs even in our initial implementation of the tool, which was the BPMN 1+. We added reference constructs, which gives us an even richer layer of information. It really helps us to tie in, particularly into the data architecture in the organization as well. So in terms of reference constructs, we allow you to enumerate business rules, business units, and stewards, and tie those things into your business processes that are and your tasks that are occurring in the organization. We can also establish links and usage across the concepts. And we also have in the BPMN2 implementation, we've also added application as a new construct on top of that, which allows you to tie in that important tie of which applications are implementing the processes in your organizations themselves. In terms of data constructs, we have business elements, entities, tables, views, data stores, data feeds, flat files, and reports, which can all be referenced in your process diagrams. Connectors are very important. In addition to the standard message flows and everything that you would see in process diagrams, we offer supplemental connectors such as links and usage connectors that we can utilize in the diagrams themselves. What the usage allows us to do in particular is allows us to define data usage. And that allows us to actually do the create, read, update, and delete specification for any given usage flow in the process model. And that allows you to build out a detailed CRUD specification in your models as well. Again, one of our objectives is to not only understand the business processes, but how those processes act and utilize the data in our organization. So this is a very powerful capability to allow you to do that. Also, in terms of those reference constructs I talked about with the ownership and responsibility, that's how we can tie in the business units and stewards. And of course, in terms of governance, business rule conformance can be tied in as well. It's very important to note that anything that we do in the ER Studio Data Architect and Enterprise Team Edition, through the repository, we can reference any data models in ER Studio Data Architect and tie that into our business processes as well. So we can get right down to the individual entity level and talk about the CRUD that's happening in the different processes themselves. With that, I will turn it over to Kim, and she will give us a brief demo of the new Business Architect BPMN2 capabilities.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I'm trying to figure out which screen I'm trying to project to. That one. All right, make sure that you guys can see can you see the business process models?
Yeah, we're good to go.
All right, good. So sorry guys for the technical deal. So hello everyone, I'm so excited to tell you about our new ER Studio Business Architect 17.0 release. In this release, we enhanced several of our elements to become fully compliant with BPMN 2.0. We have followed the full 537-page document to a T, with the exception of the BPEL generation. And all of these pretty objects are now fully available to you for business process modeling. You can choose on a model basis whether or not you'd like to turn on or off the BPMN 2.0 standard validation, and you can validate your models after the fact if you decide that you would like to build them and validate later. So with this release, we've created 2 additional sample models that you might find useful. One of these sample models is a fun way to look at BPMN modeling via pizza operations, and the other one is the model that I currently have open, which includes BPMN 2.0 examples, as well as full descriptions of the BPMN objects and some highlights on some of the BPMN validation. So the first example that I'm going to show you is the booking example. This model showcases a medium level of complexity in a diagram, and as you can see, there are several different event triggers that could occur during a booking process. One point to point out in this example, which is new to ERBA 17.0, are the event subprocesses, and these can easily collapse in order to reduce some of the complexity in your model. So if you see here, I collapse them up, and you can see the event that causes these processes to get generated, and then obviously you can expand them later as well. So the next example that I want to show you is the conversation example. Conversation diagrams are new to ERBA 17.0. These are used to show the complex behaviors that are taking place between multiple different participants. The next example that I'm going to show you is the doctor office example. This one showcases 3 different ways to document an interaction between a doctor and his patient. The top example is a classic business process diagram that's interacting with a black box pool. And this is an ideal representation if you don't know what to do with the other person's tasks. The middle example represents a collaboration diagram where tasks and behaviors take place across 2 different pools. And the bottom example represents a diagram that is new to ERBA 17.0, the choreography diagram. Choreography diagrams are great at outlining tasks that 2 or more people need to participate in order to accomplish that task. So the next example I'm going to show you is the manufacturing choreography, so that I can go into a little bit more detail so you can see another choreography example. This one's far more complex, and in this case we're dealing with how orders are processed. The next example that I'm going to show you is the Nobel Prize example. And in this example, you can see data store elements folded in that interact with the process. You should also take note of the task markers that are here in the upper left-hand corners. These are new to ERBA 17.0 release, and they allow you to better visually represent what kinds of tasks are taking place. And I'll click here to show you that the different task markers that are available to represent manual processes, user processes, processes that send or receive information, business rules, application services, and programmatic scripts, so that you can more easily designate to people what kinds of a process is taking place at a high level. One of the elements that Ron highlighted earlier was in regards to the reference objects. These are the ones that are available in ERBA 17.0. The new objects in this release include enhanced data objects, so all of the inputs, outputs, and collections. We also have new message objects, so you can have initiating or non-initiating messages. And then the new reference object that allows you to designate which applications are interacting with your process. While ERBA standalone is a highly enriched BPMN2 tool, the real power that ER Studio, Business Architect, and Data Architect have is how they tie together. So I'm going to switch to another model. This one is also in your sample models. This is the waterfront bank example. And in this example, we've showcased business process models as well as the conceptual models. And we've imported a data model in from Data Architect, which is what this AdventureWorks database is, that allows you to be able to access different tables and drop them onto your BPMN and your conceptual models. So in this case, I'm going to take a contact. And one of the things that Ron was talking about was usage. And so I can take that and say, okay, I need the contact to be involved in the loan renewal. And here I can designate the CRUD matrix, which shows the CRUD. And you can also, if you want to, within the elements here, say which ones are applying to it. So we have some pretty robust CRUD capabilities. So that's kind of the quick and dirty gist of some of our different sample models that are available. These are all available to you with your download, even if you download the trial download. And if you'd like to see the product in greater detail, feel free to download that 14-day trial or request a demo from your account rep. And with that, I will hand back over to you, Ron.
Thank you, Kim, and just waiting for screen transition here. And hopefully you can see my screen again.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you on to the collaboration side of things, and we're going to look at how this actually shows up in Team Server and gets published out. What I'm going to show you today is the same models that Kim showed you very briefly, but with a twist. One of the very powerful features in Business Architect is the ability to set color preferences and those types of things in templates. And one of the things that I always like to do is I like to set preferences in my process models. So for instance, when I look at things like the events, in business process modeling, you have things like start events, intermediate events, and ending events. So I use like a green, amber, red shading for those, just so they very quickly, easily stand out on my process diagrams. So I've applied those conventions in a copy of that sample model that Kim talked about. And so you're going to see the same models, but they're going to look a little different when I show them to you in Team Server, because I've made those changes and then published them out. There are several things and aspects in Team Server itself, and those of you that have used it will be fairly familiar with the Model Explorer as a way to get in and look at your models. When we look at the top, we see obviously a number of data models that are out here. And if we look closer to the bottom of the screen, we see the workspaces, which are the Business Architect workspaces that are checked in. It's context sensitive, so if I actually start moving my mouse over top of it, you actually see thumbnail sketches of the individual models themselves, and then I can click on the icons beside it to actually zoom into the diagrams themselves. Exactly the same behavior for our Business Architect workspaces. So if we look down here and I just kind of hold my mouse over each of those examples that Kim talked about, the booking example, there's a conversation example that was in there, the doctor's office, these are just thumbnails. The manufacturing, we see all of these here as well as a number of other ones here. And I'm actually going to be talking about the support tickets one in a little while, but let's just drill into a couple of these very quickly. Let's go back into the doctor office example that she had. So again, what we've done is you see this same diagram now published out in Team Server. And what we can also do, of course, is we can zoom in and zoom out so we can see things a little more clearly. And again, it's a very easy mechanism to share these diagrams and processes with the people in your organization. I'll do something like the manufacturing choreography that she was talking about. And again, what you see here is publishing of that diagram. You can very clearly see my events with the start and the stop events with the green and the red there. And this one is very interesting because it's got a lot of messaging and things like that involved with it as well. So it is a more complex process. But the real power, of course, is we want to be able to do the business process modeling, but sharing it in the organization and collaborating with it and defining those processes is extremely important. So being able to publish out in a medium that you can share throughout the organization, such as HTML web pages, and the metadata behind it is what we really need to be able to do, and that's what Team Server is all about. What we can also do, and I'm going to go into this one very quickly, this is support tickets. I'm going to start at it from a metadata point of view very quickly. So I have a process diagram here that outlines support tickets. We can see the underlying details, so we can see there are a lot of different processes that are involved in it. We see within those processes, all the tasks and the metadata for those processes is there. We can drill into them and go to deeper levels of detail. And of course, all the events that occur in there that we've defined, if we give them names, they all show up, and we can drill into every piece of information there as well. Of course, a picture is always worth 1,000 words. So even from within the metadata itself, we could just click and then we can see the process diagram itself that's associated with this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this particular one. This is a process that most people on this call will be very familiar with, because I think you're all used to using a help desk or that type of thing, or being in a development process where you're doing enhancements and that type of thing. So this outlines a ticketing system. So you're putting information into the ticketing system. And in particular, when we look at this middle pool here, we're talking about things about opening the tickets, reviewing them, that type of thing. And down here, inserting the issue into product backlog. This is to do with somebody's requesting a feature or something like that. So it goes into the product backlog for prioritization in something like an agile development process. Let's talk about that concept of product backlog very quickly. What we want to be able to do is augment what we're doing in both our data modeling and our business process modeling in Team Server. And the way to do that is through business glossaries, because that allows us to establish that vocabulary in our business and tie that common vocabulary into the data that we use in our organization and the business processes that we use in our organization to tie them together. So I'm going to go to another part of Team Server, and I'm going to go into glossaries very quickly here. We support a hierarchy of glossaries, so you can have dependencies between glossaries and a whole set of glossaries nested within each other. So you can break your glossaries down along a business decomposition if you wish. I've got a very simple one that I've created here, which is an agile glossary, and I've only put a few terms in it for purposes of illustration here. But when I do this, I can define the glossary itself, give it meanings. This one, again, I can give it a status, and we can actually create metadata around it as well. I'm going to go down one level because I want to see the terms in the glossary just sliding down that next tab on the left. And I've only got a few definitions here. So we've got things like our burn down charts, our burn up charts. So again, this allows us to standardize our terminology, again, based on industry standards here for our agile development processes. What you see here is you see product backlog as one of the terms. And you also saw that term referenced in one of the business processes itself. We've got the definition here for it. If I drill into it, we can actually see the definition there. We can do abbreviations, aliases. We can actually create our own metadata. So if you have other fields of information that you want to nominate about your terms in your business glossaries, you can do that as well. But what we really want to do is we want to find out where is this used. So we can do things like related glossaries, but here we want to do related ER objects because we want to see where is this term referenced. We've got some pretty cool capabilities here. I've done nothing here other than check in the model at this point in time. But because contextually we've got the found in checked, it will actually automatically create an association with me if I wish to the insert issue into product backlog because it found a match in the terminology. So that helps you to very quickly build in and tie in your business terms to the terms not only for your processes, but we will do the same thing for any of the data objects in there as well. There are other ways that we can approach this as well. So I'm going to go back out to another thing here, and I'm actually just going to go into my ER objects, which is another way of getting at all of the metadata surrounding anything that I've checked into my team server repository. And as you can see, I've got a little bit going on here. I've got over 166,000 objects and metadata objects in this particular repository in team server, and I want to be able to search on them. So let's say I put the word product in here, and it's going to filter on everything that has the word product in it. I see product that's actually in a lot of different data models and that type of thing, but it's also very useful for me to be able to do things like filtering. So I want to be able to filter on the object types that we have out there as well. So if I go through here, I'm going to filter down on tasks. If I've done that, you're actually going to see that same task that I've got there, and you also see develop product, which is another one that's in there. What I can do here is I can even follow processes or any objects in the model. So when they're changed, I'm alerted, and they show, and I have something called streams, so I get notifications and see things that are changing to these constructs in the model as well. So you can do a lot of pretty cool things here, and then you can also create hard associations with that. If I drill into the metadata itself, I go in there, and again, I can drill down into the individual insert product into the backlog. I can see the incoming sequence flows associated with it, the outgoing flows, again, the diagrams, and of course the ability to go right back and view that image of the diagram itself. So a lot of very powerful capabilities there. What you can also do is you don't have to have an exact match on names. Anything that you see in there, you can actually just go in and create a link between terms and items of interest as well. So any terms that tie into a business process that are related, even if they aren't named the same, you can link them to those business processes by going through Team Server and doing that. I'm now going to go back and talk a little about ER Studio in context. Again, this is actually a diagram that we created in the Business Architect tool as well, but we're doing it for a different purpose here. We're really showing the different context here of the different modules or applications that comprise ER Studio Enterprise Team Edition. Of course, where we started is the Data Architect that you kind of see in the orange shading here. We talked about it at the top of the webinar, the different modules. Business Architect is shown down below that. We have Repository and Team Server and the Software Architect. And I talked about those Meadow Wizard bridges that we have in the product as well that do a lot of model interchange formats to and from. What you see here is we have a lot of rich information flow and an integrated approach to tying all of these modeling products together, because the real power in driving enterprise architecture is an integrated modeling approach. So we do things like starting down on business architect. We can start with conceptual modeling in conjunction with our business process modeling, driving that out. And what you'll be able to do then is do a conceptual model or start on conceptual models. You can push those out to data architect where they can be elaborated further as logical models and even physical models. And then you can also go back the other way. So when you've elaborated more in your logical models, you can push that and refresh your conceptual models in the business architect tool as well. You can also reference any of those data model constructs from data architect through the repository in your business process models that I talked about earlier. And again, tying into that CRUD, so you can define the create, read, update, and delete for the different data constructs right within your business process diagrams. You'll probably start your business processes at a fairly high summary level, but as you drill down to the individual levels, you'll get down to the point where you want to define those interactions at the individual entity or table level. So you can do that very easily. We also have, of course, in ER Studio Data Architect, different aspects of modeling, not only logical and physical, but of course, dimensional modeling is another offshoot of both of those, and our data lineage modeling as well. So we, again, have information flows between all those different things or sharing of components between those things in the models. And of course, the workspace check-in and check-out and the model object check-in and check-out to the repository itself, which manifests itself down in the bottom left of repository and SEAM server, which of course, once the data is there, that's how we get the publishing. We can upload things like business glossaries and terms or create them from scratch in SEAM server, and then we can start to link all that information together. And then last but not least, the Meadow Wizard that we talked about into the data architect specifically. So in addition to all the powerful reverse and forward engineering bridges we have the data platform Meadow Wizard bridges for NoSQL data stores and SQL data stores that augment that. We have model interchange formats to take things from other modeling platforms. And our data lineage imports allows us to interrogate ETL platforms, bring that in and turn it into data lineage diagrams in the tool itself. And then, of course, the other tools as well. The software architect has UML models into it. We can import and export concepts from CSVs and also XMI models into the software architect. And even things like business architect, we can do things like Visio diagrams that organizations may have out there. And I'll say this in tongue in cheek, but organizations that get serious about business process modeling may have some artifacts that they have in tools like Visio. You can bring those in as a starting point and then start to augment them and have real metadata and tie it into all your models within ER Studio Enterprise Team Edition. Just a couple of things to wrap up here. The technical considerations for this release. 17.0 is a new major version release, which means because of all the new BPMN2 constructs in particular, we have metadata format changes. All of those new things we've introduced get stored in our repository, they get stored in our model formats. So of course, the metadata format has changed for the 17.0 versus the previous versions as well. What that means, of course, is you can't expect to take a previous version of Data Architect and open up a Data Arc 17.0 file, which is the way we've always worked on major releases. But we, of course, are always backwards compatible. So if you have previous versions, you can easily open them in business architect files and business architect and data architect files and data architect. Sorry, one there. So what we're really trying to do there is just remember in your environment, when you upgrade, you want to keep people all at the same level, because if you have people creating models in the 17 version, you're not going to be able to open them in the 16 version. So just make sure when you're upgrading on your large organizations that you do upgrade everybody at the same time. And then, of course, all the client applications need to be at the 17.0 version as well. And what you're finding as we're going forward in the suite is, for those of you that have been customers for quite some time, you used to find that we had different product numbers for the different components in the suite. The major number will always be consistent for the major release now across the suite. So it'll be very easy for you to tell if you're working with a compatible product. So for instance, if you have a 17 in the data architect and a 17 in the business architect, you know that you're working in a compatible suite. So when you're moving that information back and forth between the tools, that you're at the like version and it's going to work for you. In summary, we definitely would like to thank you for being here today, and we believe heavily in enterprise architecture and all organizations to be able to move forward, tie into regulatory conformance, optimize their organizations. Enterprise architecture is extremely important. And to do that, you need to be built on a solid data architecture foundation, you need to have that tied into a standards-based business process modeling solution as well, so that you can share that data and process and augment them both in tandem. And again, that integrated data and process modeling is the key. You need to be able to do that to really achieve organizational maturity and to respond to your changing environment around you. ER Studio has been in the industry for many years. We are an integrated process modeling and data management solution. We've had business process modeling for over 10 years, and we really allow you to do business-driven data modeling and architecture, business process modeling and architecture, tie that all together for enterprise architecture using those 4 domains of enterprise architecture that I talked about previously. And by doing that, you're setting yourself as a platform for model-driven governance in your organization. We covered a lot of information here today. You can see a lot more information about the product on our product pages, and the links are here, and this deck will be made available to attendees of the webinar as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Joy, and we will now look at any questions that we have.
Great. Thanks so much, Ron and Kim, for an awesome presentation and demonstration. We do have a few questions in the queue already, but for those of you who do want to ask questions, please enter those in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will start working through those questions. Ron, our first question is about Cassandra. I know we have support for Hadoop Hive, and I know we have a Meadow Wizard bridge, import bridge for Cassandra. What other support is available or planned?
We are looking at potential enhancements for Cassandra specifically in terms of building that with a native capability at some point in the future. We actually have a number of customers that are using our native Hadoop Hive capability and working very successfully with Cassandra as well. And that's one thing that's very important to remember, especially with the NoSQL platforms, because a lot of them have like a common root as to whether it's Hive, or for instance, if a lot of the other ones may be JSON based. So just because the name isn't an exact match, if you look at the underlying technology and the native bridges, trying that will often work for you.
Okay, great, thank you. So can you talk a little bit about how business process modeling relates to the conceptual modeling within the Business Architect tool?
Okay, what you really want to do is if you're a typical business analyst working on things, as you're talking to users, gathering requirements and those types of things, you're often going to find yourself elaborating those requirements and doing 2 things in tandem. You're going to start diagramming out your business processes. You're going to do a high order or high level representation of the types of things that you're doing, and you're going to start to characterize or capture some of the things that are of interest to the business. In other words, some of your key business entities and that type of thing. And you probably won't fully elaborate them when you're doing those initial discussions. So you can capture things in your business models and your business process models to do that, and you can elaborate them a little bit further in your conceptual models. So you can put things in like subject areas, you can represent the concept of business entities, and you can actually start to do some attributes on those as well. What you would typically do then as a life cycle is you would probably push that to Data Architect, where you're going to further elaborate that data model while you're proceeding and doing lower levels of detail and more elaboration on your business process models. And then you're going to bring those more elaborated data models back in so that you can tie them into those lower level tiers of your business process models to the actual entities that you're referencing. And that's where you're going to start to specify things like the create, reads, updates, and deletes.
Okay, great, thanks so much. So I've got a comment here that some people do BPMN in Visio or other tools. How does Business Architect work better than Visio, for example?
I think, if I had to do a slogan for Business Architect, I would probably say Business Architect for serious process modelers. With a lot of drawing tools, you can capture some, the drawing constructs and that type of thing. But where the gap really is Business Architect has that rich metadata that we store underneath as well. Now, we didn't delve into that in great detail. There's a ton of metadata that we capture for every construct that you have in here. And we can also do impact analysis in the tool that we didn't talk about in any great detail either. But it's really the richness of that metadata and being able to share that metadata and tie it in to the data modeling that really gives us the richness and the enterprise level capabilities. Certainly you can represent a business process at a high level with a Visio diagram. I've been in organizations where we've done that and we've replaced it with a more robust process modeling solution, because what you find is quite often those Visio diagrams are a one-shot and they become stale because they're not an active modeling solution that really allows you to enhance the business. Whereas a business process modeling tool like Business Architect allows you to model, modify, enhance, and really optimize your business. So it becomes a blueprint that you're modifying actively rather than just using for passive documentation in your organization.
We also, to add to what Ron just said, Visio does not go as deeply into the BPMN 2.0 spec. So if your organization is looking to very, very closely tie into that BPMN 2.0 spec, turning on the validation in our product will allow you to get more robustness out of that. They also don't have, I think they don't have choreography, and they have very limited conversation diagrams. So if those are two different diagram types that you want to add to your environment, Business Architect runs ahead on those elements as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim. So just to tie into that a little bit more, the business architecture is a key component of the data architecture, and having those two in sync with each other makes your overall enterprise architecture more robust and mature. Is that a correct implementation? We got a question about, what is the bada bing really all about?
Well, the bada bing is the fact that you have the integrated approach. You can't achieve organizational maturity by focusing on just one or the other. You really have to evolve your business process and your modeling and your data architecture and your modeling in tandem. It's kind of like riding a bicycle. If you need the two wheels going in tandem, otherwise you're on a unicycle and you're falling over all the time, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, so here's a question about business glossaries. Can the business glossary for Team Server be imported from other data governance tools?
We have multiple ways that you can get at that. One thing about Team Server that we didn't cover is Team Server itself is built on REST APIs. So if the other tool supports REST APIs, you can actually build your own integrations to other tools using REST if you want to. The other thing that we do, of course, is we support a CSV import and export for our business glossaries. So if you can pull it out into a CSV format, you can also pull it straight into the Team Server business glossaries using that.
Okay, great. Let's see. Kind of a more detailed question here on if I install Team Server 17 with a new Microsoft SQL Server database, is it possible to export artifacts from the current repository to the new repository?
In terms of a straight export import repository, you wouldn't do that. You can do it a couple of different ways. You can actually upgrade your existing repository to the new database version, and that will bring everything along. Otherwise, what you can do is if you wish to, you can stand up your new environment with your new database, and then just check in all of your models and artifacts again. However, the caveat of doing it that way is if you've used cross-model constructs, again, that we have, that no other vendors have. So if you use things like universal mappings, and of course, if you're using enterprise data dictionaries that you're sharing across models, you have to be very careful that you do that so you don't lose any association. So the way to do it is typically to upgrade to maintain any of those model-to-model links and constructs that are stored separately in the repository.
Okay, great, thanks. So here's kind of a more general question then. Data stewards, how do you define people with that role? Again,
it varies by organization, but stewards in general, basically stewards are the person is a person or a role that's responsible for a particular item. So if we look at something like a little bit more specifically,
sorry to interrupt, more specifically within the tool, how do you define
okay. Within the tool, you can do it in a couple of different ways. You can actually go into the Business Architect tool, And you can actually just go and open an editor, and you can, there's even a grid editor available where you can actually just enter your list of data stewards right into the tool. You can do the same thing with business organizations, business objectives, and those types of things. You can also pull them in through CSV format as well. So if you have the list, you can actually import them through CSV as well.
Okay, great. Let's see. So I know we talked a little bit about this. For customers who are still on an older version like XE7, can you kind of highlight some of the key differences that we've done since XE7 to come up to 17? I know we've made several enhancements with 2016 and 16.0 and 16.5 as well.
We have, since XE7, we have done a lot. So if you go back to the previous releases like 16 and 16.5, we saw things whereas in XE7 we had a separate team server, or what we called a portal. It started as portal, then it became team server ultimately as one database where we publish things out separate from the repository. So in 16 we combined the repository and the team server, pulling those things together, augmented the publishing capabilities. But other things that we've done is we've added a number of new platforms. We've added a number of new drawing enhancement type of capabilities throughout Data Architect in particular. We enhanced our agile change management capabilities considerably in the 2016 plus release. So in addition to, we've always had the model check-in and check-out and individual object check-in and check-out. In XE7, we introduced the ability to what we called agile change management, where you could associate it to tasks that you entered within the tool. In 2016 plus, we expanded that out so you could actually enter your tasks or user stories directly in Team Server if you wish to, and reference those in check-in and check-out. And for our customers that are using JIRA, we can actually tie into their JIRA projects, so then you can reference your JIRA tasks on check-in or check-out for your data model changes as well. So a lot of different, and I'm just scratching the surface here. We've done a number of platform enhancements. There have been a number of Meadow Wizard bridge enhancements on the way through. In the 16.5 version, we also introduced the idea of rich text formatting for all of the definitions and notes in Data Architect as well, which carries through the publishing and team service. So it allows you to create a much richer level of documentation in the tool as well.
Excellent, thanks. And if there are more of you who want to get more details on the progression of enhancements over the releases, certainly feel free to contact your sales representative and they can set up a historical roadmap view of showing all those evolution of enhancements we've done for the different versions over the past couple of years, and a roadmap and a demo of what we have going now if you would like to see that in more detail. Well, I think we have come to the end of our questions for today. Thank you again, Ron and Kim, for an excellent presentation. And for all of you on the line, thank you for coming. I invite you all to head over to IDERA.com to try our tools for free with a 14-day trial, or you can download any of our free tools. You can also ask product questions in our forum at community.idera.com. Thanks so much, and have a great week, everyone.